back again and with the first review for the channel, and this time it's for Death in Space, which isn't a Snyderverse reboot of the Muppet sketch, but actually a dark sci-fi horror-tinged OSR style game, even though I don't particularly like the term OSR, which is something we'll talk about at some point. This is what the book looks like. But we'll add in some shots of the PDF to fill out the details of what we're looking at. The game has been compared to a sci-fi Morgborg, but I think that's a little lazy on the whole, even though it is something I've been guilty of myself. I think the game probably is more a crossbreed of Mutant Year Zero and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, with the themes and darkness that it has. The first pages of the book are dedicated to a list of equipment that's available during the game. Nothing mind-blowing here. It's a simple list and prices, just enough to keep you going, although there are further ones listed at the back of the book. The first chapter is a basic background for the game. It's simple but functional enough to give you something to work with and allow you to spark some ideas, but it's fairly generic. It's not going to suddenly break all of the boundaries of everything that's been written for sci-fi or dark sci-fi, and really you are just getting something which is a springboard for other ideas. The character generation is the next chapter, and it's fairly simple, which is probably just as well, because life is fairly cheap in the game. The Death in Space website actually has a character generator on it, so you can speed it up even more. Essentially, you roll 2d4 for every one of the 4 statistics, one being a positive, one being a negative, giving you a range of 3 to -3. From the point of view of the mechanics, the only bit that really modifies it beyond that is the origin of the character. There are abilities which are similar to very, very basic feats. The characters that you generate are a good skeleton for creating a character which is your own, but the random nature of all of the individual parts that are there may put some people off. People who like a bit more control, people who like to create huge backstories for their characters. This section would also contain one of my few complaints about the game. The printed version has a dark blue on black motif going on through the character generation section, and in the wrong light, the dark blue is impossible to read. This isn't as true on the PDF. It's a lot easier to see on that. Next, you create your hub, which would be similar to the Ark in Mutant Year Zero, as I sort of alluded to earlier. It's a group decision on whether you decide to go with a spaceship or a space station, or probably more a module on a space station. It's a simple procedure and really just a quick decision between the members of the group on how they want to play that particular game. The only other thing that's included in this bit is a random section for a sort of background, a quirk to the craft that they've decided to take. The rules are a D20 modified by the relevant stat, so familiar to most Dungeons & Dragons 5e players, on top of which there is the advantage-disadvantage rule, which again will be familiar to D&D players. The meta currency is void points. You can have a maximum of 4 of these. They are used to gain advantage for a roll or to activate cosmic mutations. The last major part of the rules is void corruption. which happens when you use a void point to gain advantage on a roll and then you still fail it, at which point something very bad happens. The darkness sort of seeps into you. The next section is repairing gear and vehicles, which is a major part of the game, given that the setting has a big theme of everything being on the verge of breakdown. Gear is repaired, patched. It's not new in any way, shape or form. There is nothing new being built. So the nice simple rules that are here will get you through with enough depth that it's a factor in the game, but not enough that it becomes an accounting exercise. The combat section continues on from that base D20 modified by a relevant stat, with a few extra options to keep the combat from becoming pedestrian. Though the space combat section, which follows it, is slightly more complex, gives enough depth that you can use it in the game, and is really just the addition of some more skill rolls to make the system work. We move on to a brief overview of the antagonists for the game and some details about the star system that the game itself is set in. Again, there is enough here to give you a starting point, not necessarily enough for long-term campaigns without some work by the GM. That's not a negative. It's much like the history section at the beginning, in that there is enough there to spark your imagination and get you working, which is a lot more common in OSR games anyway. The last true chapter of the book is a short adventure to get you started. It's nice, simple. It gives you multiple ways of actually completing the adventure itself, whether you decide to go down the social route or go in all guns blazing is up to you. The only complaint that I would level against it, and it's a fairly common one for older style games, is that it takes away a bit of player agency at the very beginning. The setup for the adventure, you are put into a situation that you have no control over. That's not to say that I have a better solution to how to start the game, but it will be a complaint that some people will level at. The last 30 pages of the book are dedicated to tables and tools, which cover everything from a simple bestiary to encounters to ship upgrades to weapons. Again, there's enough here to get you started, but the GM will require to do some work for a longer term game. Not that the characters will probably survive long enough. A great touch is the final pages of the book, where there is a cheat sheet of all of the information that you will need to know quickly. Things that you would find commonly in a GM screen, or quite commonly crewed together from all of the information by players on the internet. It's nice to have this available straight away. And as I say, a nice touch to have this in the core book. It's a great starting point for a dark, horror-tinged sci-fi game, but does require a bit more work from a GM, given the deliberate vagaries of some parts of the setting, which may not make it an ideal game for a starting GM. It's a beautiful book with some great interior art, and I would recommend it as a purchase for anybody looking to get into this type of game, especially if you can pick it up with the additional adventure pamphlets. I'm not sure whether they're available outside of the Kickstarter, unfortunately. I'm looking forward to seeing where they take it, and hopefully the creator community will embrace it in the same way that they did with Mort Borg, as the community license is fairly open. On the whole, I'd thoroughly recommend it. You may not need it if you've already got a game of a similar ilk, but it's a nice starting point with a very, very basic system. I think that does it for this one. Once I have had an opportunity to play it, I will revisit this review and put up any new findings that I have. This is just my first thoughts on the book itself. If you've enjoyed the video, click like and subscribe, and click the bell for notifications.